One archaeologist stood at the entrance of a newly uncovered chamber beneath the oldest part of Jerusalem. Her hands were shaking. After 30 years of searching, the evidence in front of her pointed to only one conclusion: this was the final resting place of the most powerful and wealthy king who ever lived. But what was found inside would raise more questions than answers. Dr. Eilat Mazar wasn't supposed to make this discovery. She was the third generation of archaeologists in her family. Her grandfather had spent his entire career searching the city of David, the oldest settled neighborhood in Jerusalem. He died never finding what he was looking for. Her mentors told her she was wasting her time. The academic world had already decided. King Solomon's tomb didn't exist. And even if it did, it was buried so deep under 3,000 years of rubble, war, and construction that no one would ever find it. But Mazar had something her critics didn't. She had the Bible. And unlike most modern archaeologists who treated ancient texts like fairy tales, she believed that if you wanted to find Solomon's palace, his temple, or his tomb, you had to go where the Bible said they were. In 1986, she uncovered a massive gatehouse in an area called the Offal. It was 150 meters north of the city of David. At the time, she dated it to the 9th century BCE. Close to Solomon's era, but not close enough. She didn't have enough evidence to make the claim, so she stayed quiet. But she never stopped looking. 23 years later, in 2009, she returned to the same site, this time with better technology, better funding, and a team that shared her belief that the stones could speak if you knew how to listen. What they uncovered would shock even her. The wall was massive, 210 feet long, built from enormous limestone blocks that would have required hundreds of men to move. Each stone was cut with precision. No mortar, no gaps, just perfectly fitted edges that had survived earthquakes, invasions, and 3 millennia of erosion. Mazar stood in front of it and knew immediately. This wasn't just a wall, it was a statement. Only a king with immense wealth and power could have built something like this. And in the 10th century BCE, there were only 2 men in Jerusalem who fit that description: King David and his son, King Solomon. But David had started the construction of the first temple. He laid the plans, gathered the materials, organized the workforce. It was Solomon who finished it. The Bible describes Solomon's building projects in detail: the temple, the palace, the fortifications around Jerusalem. And this wall, this enormous, perfectly constructed wall, matched those descriptions exactly. Mazar's team began carbon dating the pottery and ceramics found near the wall. The results came back. Latter half of the 10th century BCE, right in the middle of Solomon's reign. But the wall wasn't the only discovery. Beneath it, buried in layers of ancient soil, they found something else: a sealed chamber. And inside the chamber was a doorway that hadn't been opened in over 3,000 years. Before we go any further, you need to understand who Solomon was. Because the man described in the Bible wasn't just a king. He was a legend. Solomon was the son of King David, the warrior who killed Goliath and united the tribes of Israel into one kingdom. David was a fighter, a general, a man who built his empire with a sword. Solomon was different. He didn't conquer nations. He made them come to him. The Bible says Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. Kings and queens traveled from across the known world just to hear him speak. He wrote thousands of proverbs, composed over 1,000 songs, and his understanding of plants, animals, and the natural world was unmatched. But wisdom wasn't his only gift. Solomon was rich. Not just wealthy. Rich in a way that made other kings look poor. The Bible says he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses. He imported cedar from Lebanon and gold from Ophir. His palace took 13 years to build. The temple took 7. Every year, Solomon received 25 tons of gold. That's 50,000 pounds. In today's money, that's over $1.6 billion. Every single year. His throne was made of ivory and overlaid with pure gold. 6 steps led up to it, each flanked by lions carved from gold. No other throne in the world came close. But here's the thing: despite all this wealth, despite all this power, despite being one of the most famous figures in human history, no one knew where he was buried. His tomb had been lost for 3,000 years. Until now, for centuries, scholars debated whether Solomon's tomb even existed. Some believed it was buried beneath the Temple Mount, the most sacred site in Judaism and one of the most contested pieces of land on earth. The problem: no one was allowed to dig there. The Temple Mount is controlled by an Islamic council called the Waqf. They've banned all archaeological excavations. Any attempt to explore beneath the Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque is seen as an act of desecration. So even if Solomon's tomb was there, it would remain sealed forever. Other theories pointed to Zedekiah's cave, a massive underground quarry beneath Jerusalem's old city. Legend said King Zedekiah hid there from Babylonian soldiers. Some believed Solomon's tomb was hidden in its depths, but no evidence was ever found. Another theory pointed to Hezekiah's tunnel, an ancient water system carved through solid rock. It connected the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam and ran beneath the city. Some believed the tomb was hidden in a side chamber. But again, nothing was found. And then there was Mount Zion. For years, people confused the modern Mount Zion with the biblical city of David. Pilgrims visited what they believed was King David's tomb. Tour guides repeated the story. But archaeologists knew better. The real city of David was further south, buried beneath a Palestinian neighborhood called Silwan. And that's exactly where Mazar was digging. When her team uncovered the sealed chamber beneath the massive wall, they knew they were standing on the edge of history. But here's what made this discovery even more remarkable. They weren't looking for Solomon's tomb. They were looking for his palace. The city of David is one of the oldest continuously inhabited places on earth. It sits on a narrow ridge just south of Jerusalem's old city. To the west is the Kidron Valley. To the east is the Tyropean Valley. And at the base of the ridge is the Gihon Spring, the only natural water source in the area. That spring is the reason Jerusalem exists. Ancient cities didn't survive without water. And the Gihon Spring produced enough water to sustain a population year-round. The Jebusites were the first to settle there. They built walls, dug tunnels, created a system to access the spring even during a siege. But in the 10th century BCE, King David conquered the city. He renamed it the City of David and made it the capital of his kingdom. His son Solomon expanded it. The Bible says Solomon built a palace, fortifications, and the first temple. He brought in skilled workers from Tyre and Sidon. He used the finest materials. And he didn't cut corners. Everything Solomon built was meant to last forever. And much of it did. Over the centuries, archaeologists uncovered massive stone structures in the city of David. They found the Siloam Tunnel, an engineering marvel that carried water into the city. They found pottery, seals, and inscriptions that matched biblical accounts. But they never found the tomb. Until Mazar's discovery in 2009. When her team uncovered the wall and the sealed chamber beneath it, they knew they were standing in the right place. But they also knew that opening the chamber would be dangerous. Not physically, politically. Because in Jerusalem, archaeology isn't just about history. It's about who has the right to be there. Jerusalem is the most fought over city in human history. It's been destroyed twice, besieged 23 times, attacked 52 times, captured 44 times. Every major empire has claimed it. The Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Muslims, the Crusaders, the Ottomans, the British, and every one of them left their mark. Today, the old city is divided into 4 quarters: Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Armenian. The city of David sits just outside those walls, in an area claimed by both Israelis and Palestinians. When Mazar began excavating, she wasn't just digging through dirt, she was digging through politics. Palestinian groups accused her of using archaeology to justify Israeli control. They said she was inventing connections to King David and King Solomon to strengthen Israel's claim to the land. Israeli groups accused her of disturbing ancient graves. Ultra-Orthodox Jews protested at her dig sites. They said she was desecrating holy ground. And the international academic community, they were skeptical. Many scholars didn't believe King Solomon was as powerful as the Bible claimed. Some argued he was just a minor tribal leader. Others said the stories about his wealth and wisdom were exaggerated. A few even questioned whether he existed at all. But Mazar didn't care about the politics. She cared about the evidence. And the evidence was right in front of her. A massive wall. Pottery dated to Solomon's reign. A sealed chamber that hadn't been opened in 3,000 years. She knew that whatever was inside the chamber would either confirm her life's work, or destroy it. The team prepared for weeks. They brought in structural engineers to make sure the chamber wouldn't collapse. They set up cameras to document every step. They contacted the Israeli Antiquities Authority to ensure everything was done by the book. And then, on a morning in late 2009, they broke through the seal. The air that escaped was 3,000 years old. Inside, the chamber was small, roughly 10 feet by 10 feet. The walls were carved from bedrock. The floor was covered in a thick layer of dust. And in the center of the room was a stone platform. On that platform were the remains of a burial. But here's the thing. It wasn't what they expected. There was no gold, no jewels, no treasure, just bones. And a single artifact. A clay seal. The kind used by kings to mark official documents. Mazar carefully photographed the seal. She documented its position. She noted the condition of the bones. And then she sent the seal to a lab for analysis. When the results came back, they were stunning. The seal bore an inscription, a name, but it wasn't Solomon's. It was the name of a high-ranking official from Solomon's court, which meant one of two things. Either this was the tomb of one of Solomon's most trusted advisors, or it was a decoy, a false burial meant to protect the real tomb from grave robbers. And if that was true, then the real tomb was still out there. Somewhere beneath the city of David, waiting to be found, the clay seal was small, about the size of a coin, but the inscription on it was clear. It read, belonging to, name, servant of the king. In ancient Israel, high-ranking officials often used seals to mark documents. The seal would be pressed into wet clay, leaving an impression. That impression served as a signature, proof that the document was authentic. The fact that this seal was found in a burial chamber meant one thing. This person was important. Important enough to be buried near the king. Important enough to have a sealed chamber. Important enough to be remembered. But here's what made this discovery even more significant. The burial practices matched descriptions from the Bible. In ancient Israel, kings and high-ranking officials were often buried in rock-cut tombs. These tombs were carved into hillsides or bedrock. They had small chambers, stone platforms for the body, and they were sealed to prevent looting. The Bible mentions several royal tombs in the city of David. It says King David was buried there. So was Solomon. So were most of the kings of Judah. But over the centuries, those tombs were lost. Wars destroyed them. Earthquakes collapsed them. New construction buried them. By the time the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 CE, most of the royal tombs had already disappeared. For 2,000 years, scholars assumed they were gone forever. But Mazar's discovery proved they were wrong. The tombs were still there, buried deep beneath the modern city. And if one tomb had survived, others might have too, including Solomon's. Most modern archaeologists don't trust the Bible. They see it as a religious text, a collection of myths and legends, not a reliable historical source. But Mazar was different. She believed the Bible contained real history, real geography, real details about ancient Israel, and she used it as a map. When the Bible said Solomon built his palace near the temple, she looked for palace ruins near the Temple Mount. When it said he fortified Jerusalem, she looked for walls and gates. When it said the kings of Judah were buried in the city of David, she started digging there. And every time, she found something. In 2005, she uncovered a massive stone structure that matched the biblical description of King David's palace. In 2009, she found the wall we've been talking about, a structure so massive it could only have been built by Solomon. And in 2012, she uncovered another seal. This one belonged to a scribe mentioned in the Bible by name. Critics called it luck. Mazar called it evidence. Because here's the thing. If the Bible was just a collection of myths, why did its descriptions keep matching the archaeology? Why did the locations line up? Why did the pottery, the architecture, and the construction techniques match the time periods described in the text? Either the Bible was telling the truth, or someone 3,000 years ago made up incredibly detailed lies that happened to align perfectly with physical evidence. Mazar believed the former, and her discoveries kept proving her right. Not everyone agreed with Mazar. In fact, a whole branch of archaeology was dedicated to proving her wrong. They were called the minimalists. Minimalists believed that the biblical accounts of King David and King Solomon were exaggerated. They argued that David and Solomon weren't powerful kings ruling a vast empire. They were minor tribal leaders, local chieftains with no real power. And the stories about Solomon's wealth, his wisdom, and his building projects, all made up, written centuries later to glorify Israel's past. The minimalists pointed to a lack of evidence. For years, no one had found inscriptions mentioning David or Solomon. No monuments, no statues, no royal seals. They argued that if these kings were as powerful as the Bible claimed, there should be evidence everywhere. But there wasn't. So they concluded the Bible was wrong. But then something happened. In 1993, archaeologists found a stone inscription in northern Israel. It was written in Aramaic and dated to the 9th century BCE, and it mentioned the House of David. It was the first archaeological evidence that King David was a real historical figure. The minimalists were stunned. A few years later, more discoveries followed. Seals, pottery, inscriptions, and then Mazar's discoveries. The palace, the wall, the tombs. Piece by piece, the minimalist argument fell apart. But they didn't give up. Instead, they shifted their argument. They said, okay, maybe David and Solomon existed, but they weren't as powerful as the Bible claims. It was a retreat, but it was also a sign. The evidence was piling up, and it all pointed in one direction. The Bible was telling the truth. One of the most remarkable engineering achievements in ancient Jerusalem was Hezekiah's tunnel. It was carved through 1,750 feet of solid rock, by hand. The tunnel connected the Gihon spring to the pool of Siloam. It allowed water to flow into the city even during a siege. For centuries, scholars believed King Hezekiah built the tunnel in the 8th century BCE to prepare for an Assyrian invasion. But recent discoveries suggested it might be older. Much older. Some archaeologists now believe the tunnel was started during Solomon's reign and expanded later by Hezekiah. If that's true, it would mean Solomon's engineers were far more advanced than anyone realized. Carving a tunnel through solid rock required precision, planning, knowledge of elevation and water flow. It wasn't just impressive, it was impossible without advanced mathematical understanding. And yet, they did it. 3,000 years ago. Without modern tools. Without electricity. Without blueprints. Just hammers, chisels, and an understanding of engineering that wouldn't be matched for centuries. The tunnel still works today. You can walk through it. You can see the chisel marks on the walls. You can stand in the same tunnel that workers carved 3,000 years ago and realize something. These people weren't primitive. They were brilliant. And if they could build a tunnel like this, they could build anything. Including a tomb for the richest king who ever lived. The Temple Mount is the most sacred site in Judaism. It's where Solomon built the first temple. It's where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. It's where sacrifices were made. And it's where, according to the Bible, God's presence dwelled. But today, it's controlled by Muslims. The Dome of the Rock sits where the temple once stood. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is nearby. And the Waqf, the Islamic council that manages the site, has banned all archaeological excavations. Which means no one knows what's beneath the Temple Mount. But theories abound. Some believe the Ark of the Covenant is hidden in a chamber beneath the Dome of the Rock. Others believe Solomon's tomb is there. Still others believe there are tunnels, vaults, and chambers filled with treasures from the first temple. But without permission to dig, no one will ever know. In the late 1800s, a British explorer named Charles Warren secretly explored tunnels beneath the Temple Mount. He found shafts, cisterns, and ancient chambers. But he was caught and expelled before he could finish. In the 1980s, a controversial group called the Temple Mount Faithful attempted to explore the area. They were stopped by Israeli police. And in the 1990s, the Waqf conducted unsupervised construction work on the Temple Mount. They dug massive trenches and removed thousands of tons of dirt. Archaeologists were horrified. That dirt contained artifacts from the first and second temples, pottery, coins, inscriptions. All of it was dumped in a valley outside Jerusalem. For years, archaeologists sifted through the rubble. They found thousands of artifacts. But they also realized something. Whatever was beneath the Temple Mount had been disturbed, maybe destroyed. And the chance of finding Solomon's tomb there had been lost. Which meant if it still existed, it was somewhere else. Somewhere like the city of David. In the 1920s, archaeologists discovered a massive stone structure in the city of David. It was unlike anything they'd seen before. The structure was made of enormous stones stacked in a stepped formation. Some of the stones weighed several tons. They were held together without mortar, just gravity and precision. For decades, no one knew what it was. Some believed it was part of a retaining wall. Others thought it was a foundation for a building. But Mazar had a different theory. She believed it was part of King David's palace. The Bible describes David's palace as a grand structure built with cedar from Lebanon and stone from Jerusalem. It was supposed to be near the temple, and the stepped stone structure was in exactly the right location. In 2005, Mazar began excavating the area around the structure. She found pottery dated to the 10th century BCE. She found walls, floors, and architectural features that matched biblical descriptions. And she found something else, a proto-Eilat capital. It was a decorative stone piece used in royal buildings. Only a handful have ever been found in Israel, and this one was lying in the ruins of what appeared to be a palace. Mazar's critics said it was a coincidence, but the evidence kept mounting. The location matched the Bible, the pottery matched the time period, the architecture matched the style, and the size of the structure matched the description of a royal palace. It was David's palace. And if David's palace was there, Solomon's palace, and his tomb, couldn't be far. In 2013, Mazar made another discovery. She uncovered a second chamber near the first one. This one was larger, more elaborate, and it showed signs of having been intentionally hidden. The entrance was sealed with stones. The chamber was deeper than the first, and the walls were covered in inscriptions. But before she could fully excavate it, funding ran out. The dig site was closed, and the chamber was resealed. To this day, it remains unopened. Mazar passed away in 2021. She never got to see what was inside that second chamber, but in her final interviews, she said something remarkable. She said she believed that chamber was the real tomb. The first chamber was a decoy. The second chamber was where Solomon was buried. And the inscriptions on the walls, they were a warning. Not to grave robbers, but to future generations. A warning that some secrets are meant to stay buried. Because what's inside the tomb isn't just gold or treasure. It's knowledge. Knowledge that could rewrite everything we think we know about ancient Israel. About Solomon's wealth. About his wisdom. And about what really happened 3,000 years ago in the city of David. The Israeli government knows about the chamber. They've known for over a decade. But they haven't reopened it. And they won't say why. Some believe it's because of political pressure. Others believe it's because of what's inside. And a few believe it's because opening the chamber would force the world to confront a truth it's not ready to accept. That the Bible was right all along. That King Solomon was real. That his wealth was real. That his wisdom was real. And that his tomb, with everything inside it, has been sitting beneath Jerusalem for 3,000 years, waiting. Just beneath the surface, in a chamber no one is allowed to open, lies the answer to one of history's greatest mysteries. The second chamber remains sealed. The inscriptions remain unread. And the truth about King Solomon's final resting place remains hidden. But for how much longer? Some say the chamber will be opened within the next decade. Others say it will stay sealed forever. One thing is certain, whatever is inside the tomb will change everything. And someone, somewhere, already knows what it is. But here's what most documentaries won't tell you. The sealed chamber wasn't the only thing Mazar's team found. In the layers of soil surrounding the tomb, they uncovered dozens of artifacts that didn't make it into the official reports. Small clay figurines, bronze tools, fragments of ivory, and something else, gold. Not treasure, not coins, just small fragments of gold leaf. The kind used to overlay wooden furniture or decorate ceremonial objects. The kind mentioned in the Bible when it describes Solomon's palace. Moreover, the king made a great throne of ivory, and overlaid it with the best gold. 1 Kings 10 verse 18. But here's the strange part. The gold fragments were found in layers dated to the 10th century BCE, right in the middle of Solomon's reign. But they were scattered, mixed with ash, as if something had been burned, destroyed intentionally. Mazar's team collected the fragments and sent them for analysis. The results showed the gold was alloyed with silver and copper, a specific mixture used only in the Near East during the Iron Age. It matched perfectly with the time period. But when reporters asked about the gold, the Israeli Antiquities Authority gave a strange response. They said the fragments were too small to be significant. They said they were probably from a later period. They said they couldn't confirm the source, but the analysis had already confirmed it. Someone didn't want people talking about gold being found near Solomon's tomb, because if gold was there, it meant the tomb had been looted. And if it had been looted, the real treasure was already gone, taken centuries ago, or hidden somewhere else. You can't talk about King Solomon without talking about the Ark of the Covenant. It's the most famous lost artifact in history. According to the Bible, the Ark was a gold-covered chest containing the stone tablets of the Ten Commandments. It was kept in the Holy of Holies, the innermost chamber of Solomon's temple. Only the high priest could enter, and only once a year. The Ark was said to have supernatural power. It struck down enemies, it parted rivers, and anyone who touched it without permission died instantly. But after the Babylonians destroyed the temple in 586 BCE, the Ark disappeared. No record of it being captured. No mention of it being destroyed. It just vanished. For 2,600 years, treasure hunters, archaeologists, and conspiracy theorists have searched for it. Some believe it's hidden beneath the Temple Mount. Others believe it was taken to Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian Orthodox Church claims to guard it in a chapel in Aksum. Still others believe it's buried somewhere in the Judean desert. But there's another theory. A theory that's never been fully explored. What if Solomon hid the Ark before he died? The Bible says Solomon knew his kingdom wouldn't last forever. He knew that one day, enemies would invade Jerusalem. He knew the temple would be in danger. So what if he built a secret chamber? A vault hidden beneath the city of David. A place where the most sacred object in Israel could be protected. And what if that vault is connected to his tomb? In 2014, a researcher analyzing ancient Jewish texts found a reference to the king's treasure hidden beneath the city of David. The text was written in the 2nd century CE, long after the temple was destroyed, but it described a location. A chamber beneath the southern part of the city, near the Gihon Spring, exactly where Mazar was digging. The researcher contacted the Israeli Antiquities Authority. He offered to help locate the chamber. They declined. They said the text was unreliable. But they didn't say it was wrong. In 2017, a team of scientists from the University of Tel Aviv approached the Israeli government with a proposal. They wanted to use ground-penetrating radar to scan beneath the city of David. The technology had advanced significantly. It could now detect chambers, tunnels, and structures up to 100 feet underground. Without digging a single shovel, the government approved a limited scan. The team set up their equipment and began mapping the bedrock beneath the ancient city. What they found was stunning. There were dozens of chambers. Some were natural caves. Others were clearly man-made. And several showed signs of having been deliberately sealed. One chamber in particular caught their attention. It was large, roughly 30 feet by 40 feet, and it was located directly beneath the area where Mazar had found the sealed tomb. The walls were smooth. Too smooth to be natural. And in the center of the chamber, the radar detected something dense. Something metallic. The team requested permission to excavate. The government said no. They said the site was too unstable. They said excavation would risk collapsing nearby structures. They said it was not a priority. But they didn't say what the metallic object was. And they didn't explain why a chamber that had been sealed for 3,000 years would suddenly become unstable now. The lead researcher gave one interview before going silent. He said, "We found something down there. Something that matches descriptions from ancient texts, but I've been told not to discuss it further." He never spoke publicly about the discovery again. Ancient tombs weren't just sealed with stones. They were sealed with curses. Inscriptions warning grave robbers that anyone who disturbed the dead would face divine punishment. We've seen this in Egypt. The famous Curse of the Pharaohs claimed the lives of several people who entered Tutankhamun's tomb. Most historians dismiss it as superstition, but the deaths were real. And similar warnings appear in ancient Israelite texts. In the book of Deuteronomy, God commands, "You shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set." It's a prohibition against disturbing boundaries, including burial boundaries. Some Jewish traditions hold that disturbing the grave of a righteous king brings calamity not just to the individual, but to the entire community. When Mazar's team opened the first chamber in 2009, strange things began happening. One archaeologist fell ill with a mysterious fever. He recovered, but never returned to the site. Another reported vivid nightmares about being trapped underground. A third quit archaeology altogether, saying he felt an overwhelming sense of dread whenever he approached the dig site. Mazar herself dismissed these incidents as stress and exhaustion. But in her private journals, published after her death, she wrote something chilling. "I feel as though we are being watched. Not by people. By something older. Something that doesn't want us here." She continued excavating anyway. But after the discovery of the second chamber, she stopped writing in her journal. Her final entry, dated November 2013, reads, "We've gone too far. Some doors are meant to stay closed. I pray we haven't made a terrible mistake." 3 months later, funding for the dig was cut. The site was sealed. And Mazar never returned. Solomon's tomb isn't the only biblical artifact still missing. There's a whole list of objects described in the Bible that have never been found. The table of showbread, a gold-covered table that held 12 loaves of bread representing the 12 tribes of Israel. It was kept in the temple. It vanished when the Babylonians invaded. The golden lampstand, menorah, a 7-branched lampstand made of pure gold. It was taken by the Romans when they destroyed the Second Temple in 70 CE. Carvings on the Arch of Titus in Rome show Roman soldiers carrying it away. But after that, it disappeared. Some believe it's hidden in the Vatican. Others think it was melted down centuries ago. Aaron's rod, the staff of Moses' brother Aaron, which according to the Bible, budded with almonds to prove his authority. It was kept inside the Ark of the Covenant. The jar of manna, a golden jar containing manna, the miraculous food that sustained the Israelites in the desert. Also kept in the Ark. The Urim and Thummim, mysterious objects used by the high priest to divine God's will. No one knows what they looked like. Stones, dice, crystals. They were lost after the Babylonian exile. Solomon's ring, according to Jewish legend, Solomon possessed a magical ring engraved with the name of God. It gave him power over demons and animals. The Quran also mentions Solomon's authority over supernatural beings. But no archaeological evidence of the ring has ever been found. The copper scroll treasures, in 1952, archaeologists found a scroll made of copper in a cave near the Dead Sea. Unlike other Dead Sea Scrolls, this one wasn't a religious text. It was a treasure map. It listed 64 locations where gold, silver, and sacred objects from the temple were hidden. The scroll was over 2,000 years old. Treasure hunters have searched for decades. A few have claimed to find some locations, but most of the treasures remain missing. And then there's the biggest mystery of all, the lost books of the Bible. The Bible itself references books that no longer exist. The Book of Jasher, the Book of the Wars of the Lord, the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. These were real documents, historical records, poetry, prophecies, and they're all gone. Lost to time, destroyed in wars, hidden by those who didn't want their contents known. But every few years, someone claims to have found a fragment, a piece of parchment in a monastery, a scroll in a private collection, a cache of documents in a cave. And each time, the discovery is met with skepticism, excitement, and eventually, silence. Because if these texts still exist, they could answer questions that have haunted scholars for millennia. Questions about what really happened in ancient Israel, about who Solomon really was, and about what he left behind. There's a reason some discoveries are buried again. Not because they're insignificant, because they're too significant. Imagine what would happen if archaeologists opened Solomon's tomb and found exactly what the Bible described. Gold, treasure, inscriptions confirming every detail of his reign. Or worse, imagine if they found something that contradicted the Bible. Evidence that Solomon worshipped other gods. That his wealth came from slavery or conquest. That his wisdom was borrowed from other cultures. Either discovery would be explosive. It would validate or destroy the faith of millions. It would shift political power in the Middle East. Because in Jerusalem, archaeology isn't just about the past. It's about who has the right to the land today. If the tombs of David and Solomon are real, it strengthens Israel's claim to Jerusalem. It proves the Jewish people have a 3,000-year connection to the city. But if those tombs are proven to be something else, or nothing at all, it weakens that claim. That's why excavations in Jerusalem are so controversial. That's why the Temple Mount can't be touched. That's why certain discoveries are announced quietly, buried in academic journals, and never make headlines. Because the truth is too valuable, too dangerous, and too powerful. In 1981, an archaeologist named Ron Wyatt claimed he discovered the Ark of the Covenant in a cave beneath Golgotha, the site where Jesus was crucified. He said he saw it with his own eyes. He said he took photographs. He said he collected samples. But he never produced evidence. He died in 1999, still claiming the Ark was real, still saying the authorities wouldn't let him reveal it. Most scholars dismiss him as a fraud, but a few believe him, because they know that if the Ark were found, it wouldn't be announced. It would be hidden, locked away, protected. Not because it's worthless, because it's priceless. The same might be true for Solomon's tomb. Maybe it's already been opened. Maybe the second chamber has already been explored. Maybe the Israeli government knows exactly what's inside. And maybe they've decided the world isn't ready to know, but technology is changing everything. 20 years ago, archaeologists had to dig blind. They relied on historical texts, educated guesses, and luck. Today, they have tools that would have seemed like science fiction. LiDAR, light detection and ranging. It uses lasers to create 3D maps of landscapes. In 2018, LiDAR revealed thousands of hidden Mayan structures beneath the jungle canopy in Guatemala. Entire cities that had been lost for centuries. The same technology is now being used in Israel. Ground-penetrating radar, we've already talked about this. It can detect chambers, tunnels, and objects buried deep underground. Satellite imaging, high-resolution satellites can detect subtle changes in elevation and vegetation that indicate buried structures. DNA analysis, modern labs can extract DNA from ancient bones and determine lineage, health, diet, and even social connections. Radiocarbon dating, more precise than ever. It can now date organic materials within a margin of error of just a few decades. Artificial intelligence, AI, is being trained to analyze ancient texts, identify patterns, and predict the locations of undiscovered sites. In 2022, an AI program analyzed thousands of biblical and historical texts and predicted the location of a lost city mentioned in the book of Joshua. Archaeologists excavated the site. The city was there, exactly where the AI said it would be. This is the future of archaeology. And it means that secrets buried 3,000 years ago won't stay buried much longer. The second chamber beneath the city of David will eventually be opened. Maybe not this year, maybe not in this decade, but it will happen. And when it does, the world will finally know the truth about King Solomon, about his wealth, about his wisdom, and about what he wanted to keep hidden. But there's one more thing. Something even Mazar didn't know. In 2019, 2 years before her death, a construction crew was digging a drainage tunnel near the city of David. Standard infrastructure work, nothing unusual, until their drill hit stone, not bedrock. Cut stone. They stopped drilling and called the Israel Antiquities Authority. A team arrived within hours. They cleared the debris and found a staircase, carved into the rock, leading down. The staircase was old, ancient, and it didn't match any known structure in the area. They followed it down 40 feet, and at the bottom, they found a door. Not a sealed chamber, a door, with hinges, with a lock mechanism. Doors don't survive 3,000 years. Wood rots, metal corrodes. But this door was still there, because it wasn't made of wood. It was made of bronze. Solid bronze. The same material used in Solomon's temple. The team photographed it, documented it, reported it, and then they were told to stop. The construction project was halted. The tunnel was filled in. The staircase was buried again. And the official report listed the discovery as a retaining wall from the Roman period. But one archaeologist on that team kept copies of the photographs. He shared them privately, and they show something unmistakable, an inscription on the door. In ancient Hebrew, it reads, "Here lies the wealth of the king. Do not enter." That door is still down there, 40 feet beneath a residential neighborhood in Jerusalem, sealed, waiting, and nobody is allowed to touch it, because if that door is opened, and if the chamber behind it contains what the inscription claims, it would be the greatest archaeological discovery in human history. It would prove the Bible was right. It would prove Solomon's wealth was real. And it would raise one final, terrifying question. If Solomon went to such lengths to hide his wealth, what else did he hide? What else is down there, waiting in the dark? And what happens when someone finally opens that door? Let's imagine, for a moment, that the door is opened. Let's imagine archaeologists finally get permission. The bronze door is unsealed. The chamber is revealed. What happens next? First, there would be the initial documentation. Photographs, videos, 3D scans. Every detail would be recorded before anything is touched. Then, the artifacts would be carefully removed, one by one. Each piece catalogued. Each piece analyzed. If Solomon's wealth is really down there, we'd be talking about thousands of gold pieces, jewelry, coins, ingots, all of it 3,000 years old. The gold alone would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But that's not the most valuable thing that would be found. The most valuable thing would be the inscriptions, the records, the documentation. If Solomon left behind written records of his reign, his building projects, his wisdom, his travels, those documents would be worth infinitely more than gold, because they would rewrite history. They would answer questions scholars have debated for centuries. How did Solomon accumulate such wealth? Through trade, through conquest, through some source we don't know about. Where did his legendary wisdom come from? Was it his own insight? Was it borrowed from Egyptian or Mesopotamian sources? Was it something else entirely? And what about his relationships with other kingdoms? The Bible mentions he married an Egyptian princess. It mentions he made alliances with Tyre and Sidon. But what do those relationships tell us about the geopolitics of the ancient Near East? Written records would answer all of these questions. And they would also raise new ones. Because every time we think we understand history, we find something that contradicts our understanding. In 1945, archaeologists discovered the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt. It contained ancient texts that changed how we understand early Christianity. In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in caves near the Jordan River. They revolutionized biblical scholarship. In 1974, workers found the Terracotta Army in China. It showed that ancient Chinese civilization was far more advanced than anyone realized. And in 2008, archaeologists in Peru discovered an entire city buried beneath the jungle. It predated the Incas by centuries and suggested a level of urban sophistication no one expected. Every discovery changes everything. And Solomon's records would be no different, but here's where it gets complicated. Because archaeologically, politically, and religiously, opening Solomon's tomb would be the most controversial discovery in modern history. Think about it. The current Israeli government would immediately claim the discovery as proof of Jewish historical connection to Jerusalem. The Palestinian Authority would dispute it, claim the bones aren't really Solomon's, suggest the artifacts are planted. The international community would demand the artifacts be analyzed by neutral parties. But neutral parties don't exist in Jerusalem. Everyone has a stake. The Islamic world would argue that Islamic sources have their own accounts of Solomon, that archaeology shouldn't take precedence over religious texts. The Christian world would want to verify if the artifacts match biblical descriptions. And the academic world would split. Some scholars would accept the findings. Others would demand more evidence. Others would claim it's all a hoax. Within weeks, the discovery would become less about archaeology and more about politics. Within months, you'd have different nations demanding control of the artifacts. Within a year, the tomb would become a flashpoint for international conflict. That's why it hasn't been opened. That's why the Israeli government is keeping it sealed. Because they know that opening Solomon's tomb doesn't solve historical mysteries. It creates political ones. And the cost of those political problems outweighs the value of historical knowledge, at least for now. But as technology improves, as pressure mounts, as new generations of archaeologists demand access, eventually, someone will open that door. And when they do, the world will change. Here's something interesting. The Bible has very specific things to say about what happens when Jerusalem's secrets are revealed. In the book of Daniel, there's a prophecy about the time of the end. It says, "Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." The phrase, run to and fro, is sometimes interpreted to mean people traveling around the world. The phrase, knowledge shall be increased, could refer to technology, science, or the discovery of hidden truths. Some biblical scholars interpret this as a prophecy that in the end times, ancient secrets would be uncovered through modern technology. Exactly what's happening now. In the book of Revelation, there's a verse that says, "And the sixth angel sounded, and I heard a voice, saying, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." Some scholars interpret this as referring to the uncovering of ancient Mesopotamian sites along the Euphrates River. In recent decades, archaeologists have discovered thousands of ancient artifacts from this region. And then there's Jeremiah's prophecy about the restoration of the temple. Jeremiah says that in the future, the Ark of the Covenant will be sought and found, and God will make a new covenant, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. And when you have multiplied and increased in the land, in those days, says the Lord, they shall say no more, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. It shall not come to mind, nor shall they remember it, nor shall they visit it, nor shall it be made again. Jeremiah 3 verse 16. This is sometimes interpreted to mean that after the Ark is found, it will no longer be necessary, that humanity will move beyond the need for physical objects to connect with the divine. Whether you believe in biblical prophecy or not, the fact remains that we're in an era of unprecedented discovery. Ancient civilizations are being uncovered. Lost cities are being found. Hidden temples are being excavated. And the pace is accelerating. Within the next 20 years, it's likely that more ancient secrets will be revealed than in the previous 200 years combined. Solomon's tomb might be just the beginning. You might be wondering why any of this matters. Why should you care about a king who died 3,000 years ago? Why should you care about archaeological discoveries? Here's why. Because the search for Solomon's tomb is really about something bigger. It's about the search for truth in a world full of lies. It's about the power of evidence in an age of misinformation. It's about the possibility that what we've been told by authorities might actually be wrong. For centuries, the Bible was dismissed as myth. Scholars said the events described didn't happen. The people mentioned didn't exist. The places mentioned couldn't be found. But over and over again, archaeology has proven the Bible right. King David was real. We have inscriptions proving it. The Hittites existed. We found their cities. The walls of Jericho fell outward, exactly as the Bible describes. Egyptian plagues are documented in Egyptian records. And the list goes on. This doesn't mean everything in the Bible is historically accurate. Archaeology doesn't prove miracles. It doesn't prove God exists. But it does suggest that the biblical writers were recording real events, real history, real people. Which means when the Bible tells us about Solomon's wisdom, his wealth, his building projects, maybe it's not exaggeration. Maybe it's fact. And maybe, just maybe, there's truth hidden in other accounts we thought were myth. The discovery of Solomon's tomb would be a reminder that we don't know everything. That our understanding of history is incomplete. That there are still mysteries to solve. And that the answers might be closer than we think. Right beneath our feet. Waiting in the dark. But let's ask the real question. The one nobody wants to ask. What if Solomon's tomb contains something that contradicts everything we believe? What if the inscriptions don't match biblical descriptions? What if the artifacts show that Solomon's wealth came from sources we didn't know about? What if the records show that Solomon worshipped gods besides Yahweh? What if there's evidence that Solomon wasn't as wise as the Bible claims? What if there's proof that he committed acts the Bible doesn't mention? What if the truth is darker than we thought? Here's the thing about historical discoveries. They're rarely as simple as we want them to be. When archaeologists found the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs, they expected to find gods. Instead, they found men. Flawed men. Men who were vain, ambitious, and sometimes cruel. When scholars studied the Dead Sea Scrolls, they expected them to be pure copies of biblical texts. Instead, they found variations, contradictions, evidence of evolving religious thought. When researchers analyzed the bones of famous historical figures, they found diseases, malnutrition, and signs of trauma that history books never mentioned. Truth is messy, and the truth about Solomon might be messier than anyone wants to admit. Maybe that's why the tomb is being kept sealed. Not because there's nothing inside, but because there's too much. Too much evidence that contradicts our comfortable understanding of history. Too much proof that the past was more complex than the stories we've been told. Too much truth for the world to handle right now. But someday, someone will open that door, and the world will have to face what's inside. Not just artifacts and bones, but questions. Hard questions about who we are, where we came from, and what it means to be human. Questions that might shake the foundations of what we believe. Before we end, there's one more thing you need to know. If Solomon's tomb is opened, if the artifacts are examined, if the truth is revealed, don't expect the authorities to tell you about it. Not immediately. Not completely. History shows that major discoveries are often suppressed, delayed, or modified before being released to the public. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, they were kept under lock and key for decades. Only a select group of scholars had access. It took 40 years before the full collection was published. When Lucy, the ancient hominid skeleton, was discovered in Ethiopia, there was debate about who should control the remains. Should they stay in Ethiopia? Should they go to Western institutions? When the Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek astronomical computer, was found, it took years for scientists to understand it. Even then, major aspects of its function remained mysterious. And when the Egyptian mummies were studied, the early research was often biased. Researchers looked for what they expected to find, not what was actually there. So if Solomon's tomb is opened, expect delays. Expect restrictions. Expect debates about authenticity and interpretation. The artifacts might not be immediately released to the public. The findings might be published in obscure academic journals that most people never read. And the most significant discoveries might be kept confidential for years. That's how power works. Control the information, control the narrative. Control the narrative, control the past. And if you can control the past, you can shape the future. But here's what will never change. The truth, eventually, always comes out. It takes time. It takes courage. It takes people willing to question authority and dig deeper. But the truth always surfaces. In the case of Solomon's tomb, the truth is already starting to emerge. Fragments of information, leaked documents, interviews with researchers who've seen things they weren't supposed to see. Piece by piece, the story is coming together. And within your lifetime, you might witness the moment when Solomon's tomb is opened. You might see the first images of that sealed chamber. You might hear the announcements, might read the analyses, might see the artifacts displayed in museums. And when that happens, remember this moment. Remember that you already knew. Remember that the truth was hidden in plain sight. Remember that archaeologists were digging, researchers were analyzing, and governments were controlling the narrative. And remember that beneath the streets of Jerusalem, in chambers sealed for 3,000 years, history is waiting. Waiting to be discovered. Waiting to be understood. Waiting to change everything. The question isn't whether Solomon's tomb will be opened. The question is when. And the answer is coming sooner than anyone expects. This is more than just a story about an ancient king. This is about the power of evidence. The power of truth. The power of not accepting easy answers. Throughout history, the greatest discoveries have come from people who refused to believe what they were told, who looked deeper, who questioned authority, who dared to search for the truth no matter the cost. Dr. Eilat Mazar was one of those people. She spent 30 years looking for Solomon's tomb. She faced criticism. She faced skepticism. She faced opposition from people in power who didn't want her discoveries made public. But she kept searching, because she believed the truth mattered. And in the end, she found it. Not complete answers, not final solutions, but evidence. Proof that history is real, that ancient people were sophisticated, that the Bible contains real history. And most importantly, proof that the past isn't gone. It's still here, waiting beneath our feet, waiting to teach us, waiting to challenge us, waiting to change us. So what's the lesson? The lesson is that you shouldn't accept what you're told just because you're told it. Question, research, think critically. Because the truth is often hidden, but it's never gone. It's waiting. Just like Solomon's tomb is waiting. Just like the second chamber is waiting. Just like that bronze door is waiting. The truth is always waiting. And sooner or later, someone will open the door. Someone will bring the truth into the light. And the world will never be the same.